What is toxic femininity? We hear time and time again about toxic masculinity. And it's a bit nebulous, but the general idea is like a macho guy who wants to be tough and he won't cry and he pushes people around, the alpha, the bully. They call that toxic masculinity. The guy who wants to run in full speed and run through a field of landmines because he thinks he's tough. But what is toxic femininity? Well, here we have a story from Medium. They say, "Me Too will not survive unless we recognize toxic femininity. Women are not monolithic. Pretending they are holds everyone back." And this is by Megan Dom. She says, "Sometimes I wish I could gather up all the women I've ever known or encountered and conduct this informal poll." And now here comes the huge list of toxic femininity. Raise your hand if you've ever behaved badly and blamed it on your period. Raise your hand if you've ever acted helpless in the face of an unpleasant, if not physically demanding task, like dealing with a wild animal that's gotten inside the house. Raise your hand if you've ever coerced a man into sex even though he didn't seem to really want it. Raise your hand if you've thought you were at liberty to do this coercing because men always want it and should feel lucky anytime they get it. Raise your hand if you've ever threatened to harm yourself if a man breaks up with you or doesn't want to see you anymore. Raise your hand if you've ever been physically abusive with a male partner, knowing you'd be unlikely to face legal consequences. Raise your hand if you've lied about being on birth control or faked a pregnancy scare to see how a man would respond. Raise your hand if you've ever manipulated a divorce or child custody dispute in your favor by falsely insinuating that a man has been abusive toward you or your child. She goes on, "In this hypothetical gathering of every woman I've ever known or encountered, I'm imagining a football stadium at decent capacity. I'm certain there is not a single one of these questions that, if answered honestly, wouldn't send hands into the air, including my own. I know I'm guilty on the pest control front. I don't want to think too hard about some of the others." So, this idea of toxic masculinity, well, actually, we'll carry on and then I'll make my point. She says, we hear all too much about toxic masculinity, that amorphous term that refers to the way traits like aggression and emotional repression are baked into male social norms. It also frequently shows up in online feminism as lazy shorthand for registering disapproval of just about anything men do at all. But when are we going to grant equal rights to women and admit that toxic femininity also exists and can be just as poisonous? And so I started thinking about what is masculinity and what is toxic masculinity. And for most people, masculinity is like rising to the challenge, overcoming the odds, sacrifice, defending others, doing hard and arduous tasks, opening the pickle jar from a small scale to a high scale. And then the toxic masculinity is the arrogant, elitist, snooty, undeserving, narcissistic personality traits of men who think they're tough, who think they're strong, or who pretend to be and try to assert themselves above others, constantly interrupting everybody, negative traits associated with strength. Then we can look at femininity. And what is femininity? Well, a lot of people are going to give you a lot of different definitions of both terms. To me, I see femininity as more of like a nurturing, caring, and understanding trait. When you're hanging out with guys, is there going to be like a serious conversation about fears and your love and your family and how you feel about things? Not often. At least in my experience, we tend to talk about things we do. When I hang out with women, I tend more to talk about things that are going on in my life and how I feel. And so I feel like when it comes to women, femininity is more of an emotional and social bonding, and masculinity is more of a constructive and systemic practice. And I think it's interesting when you look at something like James Damore's memo, where he said men like to systemize, women like to empathize. And I said, I think that's a good example of like the general masculine and feminine traits. Well, if we're talking about men who are overly aggressive and narcissistic as the toxic masculinity, then to me, the toxic femininity would be the emotional manipulation, the fake tears, pretending to be weak, to manipulate people into getting what you want, feigning the victim. So this is really interesting when we look at the regressive left and the things that go on with many of the people associated with the illiberal reactionary left, in that they're feigning the victim to emotionally manipulate people into supporting them. Quite honestly, I feel like there is toxic masculinity. There are, macho dudes who go around thinking they're smarter and better than everyone. And then we have the regressive left, which is rife with toxic femininity. This idea among intersectional feminists that oppression is power. That by being oppressed, you can emotionally manipulate people into doing what you want and gaining power. And we see this. Is it prevalent? I'm not trying to paint a picture that everyone on the left is doing this. No. People are going to try and misconstrue and say, Tim's painting all left. No. That's what they do, okay? What I'm trying to say is that there are negative elements on the right. There are negative elements within masculinity. There are negative elements within the anti-SJW crowd, but there are also negative elements in the regressive left. The regressive left is a term for the negative elements of the left, right? But then there's negative elements within femininity and general left-wing politics. It's just true. There's balance in all things. There's nuance. And what we want to do is we want to pick the best things from every different faction and put them together to make the best thing possible. Get rid of the bad, take in the good. This is true for like multiculturalism, right? We don't want to have like a bunch of different competing like two different groups that can't even speak each other's language. No, we want to have a bunch of people to come together and agree to take the best parts of our cultures and make an even better place to live. And I think, honestly, sidestep, the US, the West, we do a really great job of this. And we're seeing a lot of countries in the East have similar practices where you're free to do, free market, you're free to speak and do what you want to do. But anyway, back to this idea about, I don't want to go off on a tangent on other things. The point is, all too often, we are not seeing a critical look at toxic femininity. And that's why I think this article is interesting. So let's carry on with this article. There are minor forms of feminine toxins, like blaming irrational temper tantrums on being hormonal, or feigning helplessness in order to get what you want. And there are major toxins, many having to do with weaponizing your fragility, so that those to whom you cause harm have a difficult time defending themselves, lest they look like the aggressors. Bingo. Women, of course, can unleash these tactics on other women, be they romantic partners or not. But for the sake of this discussion, let's say we are talking about women and men and sex. We've established that many men are socially conditioned to think that women owe them sex, but what about the women that assume that men should be grateful for any sex they get? Not only that, what about the women who think they're entitled to material possessions for going on a date with you? I'm going to tell you straight up. There was a time, about 8 years ago, where I was broke. I had only a few $100s to my name. And I went on a date with somebody, and we went out to get food, and after, we talked and hung out, she just got up and said said nothing and provided nothing and made me pay the bill. Now, of course, I could have said, you take care of your half, but it was a really awkward position for me. And what I found out later was that she only went on a date with me in the first place for free lunch. That is toxic femininity. She had no interest in my companionship or talking with me. And that hurts. Because I feel like there are a lot of guys who think that because they buy you dinner, they're deserving of something from you. No, plain and simple, not true. And you can see the internet is rife with people who think this. Are these men misogynists? Well, some of them probably yes, absolutely. Actually, many of them. Are all of them? No, of course not. But there are a lot of guys, or I should say, there is it's nuanced. It's not black and white. It is a misogynistic thing to do to believe you're entitled to favors, adult activities. Even though I already said it, trying to avoid demonetization, simply because you bought someone dinner. But the inverse is the other extreme. The idea that you're entitled to free dinner or a free drink simply because you're going to go hang out with a guy is absolutely toxic femininity, okay? And these things exist. And I don't, in the fight for equality, one of the things that often gets brought up is you don't see feminists out demanding the right to work in sewers or to be, garbage carriers and things of that nature. Some women actually do fight for that, for sure. There was a couple women who were arguing for women doing garbage waste management. That's awesome. That's incredible. Obviously, look, I know why nobody wants to advocate for the right to go work in a sewer or on an oil rig, but there is a serious problem because if we're talking about equality, then responsibility comes with it. And this is something you'll often hear a lot more on the right or on the anti-SJW side, where they say equal rights and equal responsibility, and you can't have rights without responsibility. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I kind of do. What I mean by that is nuanced. I think everyone, no matter what, is deserving of human rights and opportunity, and responsibility tends to fall on those who are willing to uphold it. The point is, regardless of what you do, there are some responsibilities in society, like paying taxes and not breaking laws, and you have your rights. Your rights exist within you no matter what. Rights can't be taken away. So for people to demand they want certain things, they're not getting certain things, well, at the same time, you also have to recognize that you're going to be subjected to things that aren't as good that come with it. This is a natural part of equality. And I think this is what this article is kind of bringing up. That yes, there absolutely should be equality for all people, but don't forget, you are also responsible to a certain extent. The reason why I think rights are above responsibility, like they're not absolutely, like, I'll try to explain it. Look, are we going to demand that a woman who is 110 pounds be a firefighter? No, of course not. We want someone who's big. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, just so long as you can carry a person through a burning building. But because someone can't be a firefighter, does that mean they're not deserving of rights? Absolutely not. Of course they deserve their rights. So that's why there is a difference here. But it is interesting to see the argument brought up that there are certain things that women don't advocate for. Are feminists, intersectional feminists, going out and complaining that women serve less jail time, that men often lose in custody hearings? Most of them, no. Some of them, yes. Some of them, yes. But a lot of the issue is that when it comes to the discussion about toxic masculinity, we need to talk about toxic femininity too. The idea that there are going to be women who are emotionally manipulative, that we're going to start seeing this practice of feigning weakness, pretending to be the victim, so you can paint the enemy, you can paint the other as the bad guy, and then win some kind of political power. Now, I'm not going to go through the entirety of the article, but I will put the link in the description below so you can read it, and I'll just read the final thing that Megan says. She says, "Me Too is important. Believe women is hollow sloganeering that will ultimately set us back rather than move us forward. Like all movements, Me Too will live or die by the degree to which it's willing to let people in. Until it makes room for examinations, not just of toxic masculinity, but of also toxic femininity, and even better, dispatch with these meaningless terms, it will continue to tell only half the story. Until it admits that women can be as manipulative and creepy and generally awful as men, the movement will continue to send a message that we're not really whole people. And why would anyone believe someone like that?" Well, it is what it is, I suppose. It's often how I end some of these videos, because will this article bring about change? I don't think so. I think our future is headed in a specific direction, and I don't think there's anything that can be done about it. We can sit here and complain all day and night, but I don't know what's gonna. I don't know what's gonna make any of it change, short of maybe going and voting. But even voting isn't necessarily gonna change things. So there you go. I mean, let me know what you think, I guess. I'm gonna get out of here. I'll have more videos up on the main channel, youtube.com/timcast, starting tomorrow at 4. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.